Was going to be singing this morning. He sings at our center, and it's always a wonderful treat. So how delightful to have him here today as well. Am I?
You could have him there with the mic.
Okay. This works better. Okay, good. I actually have a big voice, but we'll go from there. Anyway, I was just lauding James. It's just a pleasure to have him at our center, and so it's a delight to have him here today. So my talk title today is Planting the Seeds of Our Intentions and What to Throw. And it kind of comes a little bit on the quote I gave from Octavia Butler on her brilliant book, The Parable of the Sower, where she talks about how God is change. You know, in the Hebrew Bible, the great poets that wrote there, there's this wonderful story where Moses asks God's name. And the answer is given, Yahadver Asher Yahadver, which is the verb to be, present future tense. I am that I am becoming. And in a sense, what that is saying is that to me, this vast, unfinished, therefore imperfect, messy universe that we call home on this lovely little jewel of a planet is always undergoing change. That if there is a first law, it is the law of evolution. And that there's also changes that we see all the time, right? Again, you know, the poets of the Hebrew Bible, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. There is a time to sow and a time to reap. And in the ancient world, we're sort of in that season of reaping and sowing. You know, we're in the season of Virgo. Soon it is going to be autumn. And so this is the time that our ancient brothers and sisters and ancestors would harvest and discern on the threshing floor what to keep and what to give away and move forward. And so we kind of do that. So I have a personal story on that. When I moved to Fallbrook back in 2005. And before that I was living in Hillcrest. And for anybody that knows, Hillcrest is like the opposite of Fallbrook in so many ways. And I was that embodiment. I was a total city boy, and I moved to Fallbrook, and the first thing that I wanted to do was to plant a garden. And I had a friend, his name was Jerry, and Jerry was a brilliant farmer. He really was. He was quite successful as a farmer. And so he was mentoring me in the ways of gardening. And I lived in a pretty rural area. And every time I would do something, the birds would come, the squirrels would come, these things my dogs would be like in suspended animation as the squirrels would sort of back their truck up to the garden. And so Jerry would say, well, what you need to do is you need to put this on it, CDs on it, and put it on this, and put it on that. And I remember I had my writing table, which was up above. My office would look down onto this garden. And I remember one morning looking down there saying, this is so sad. This is actually kind of pitiful. And there was no beauty in it. And if I did the math, I think I figured it out. I was spending about maybe $400 a tomato on that garden. And it wasn't my forte, but Jerry, being a good friend of mine, you know, he was a great mentor on gardening, and to him, when he looked at it, he saw beauty. I saw, you know, this sort of garage sale of all these different kinds of things. But you know, he was a great teacher in so many ways, and it's interesting to me how gardening, how nature, how the cycles of things, you know, they are, of course, the physical experience that we're in, but something that Schopenhauer says, and he says that everything in the physical world is but a metaphor. And so we can look at all the things that are about, I mean, we think about Jesus, right? Jesus gives this great teaching of a sower who, the parable of the sower, actually, that Octavia Butler, her book is on. So, you know, this sower goes out and he casts seeds, right? And some seeds fall on the road and they get trampled and nothing becomes of them. Some seeds go into the rocks and they're never able to take root. They just don't do it. Some go into the brambles and they may grow for a while and flourish, but they eventually get choked out. And some go into fertile soil and they produce a multitude of harvests. Well, on one level, you know, Jesus may be giving lessons on gardening, but I think you and I would agree that there's something deeper there. There's something that's even more profound about what he's saying about, you know, planting the seeds of our intentions, where they go and how they go about doing things. Thomas Troward, who was a brilliant metaphysician of the late 19th and 20th century, he was a great mentor to both Charles Fillmore, who is the founder of your denomination, and Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of our denomination. But he talks about this, and in his Edinburgh lectures, he talks about the principle of growth. And he says this, if I may quote it. He says, "The principle of growth is that of inherent vitality in the seed itself, and the operations of the gardener have their exact analog in mental science. We do not put self-expansive vitality into the seed, but we must sow it, and we must also, so to speak, water it in quiet, concentrated contemplation of our desire as an actual accomplished fact. But we must carefully remove from such contemplation any idea of strenuous effort on our part to make the seed grow. The efficacy is in helping to keep out those negative thoughts of doubt, which would plant tares among our wheat, and therefore, instead of anything of effort, such contemplation should be accompanied by a feeling of pleasure and restfulness in foreseeing the certain accomplishment of our desires." Which is a good and important and profound teaching. But I think, like so many things, you know, there needs to be a little bit of refinement on that. And so I'd like to go back to something that Jerry taught me about gardening and about planting. So when Jerry would plant seeds, he would always plant 3. And he would say, 1 for the crow, 1 for the hoe, and 1 to grow. And I think there's a real profundity in that as we set the seeds of our intentions. I think it's important to kind of follow that as well. Because to me, you know, 1 for the crow, what does that mean? Well, I know what it means in Fallbrook when I plant my gardens. It means that the crows, they look at the garden and they go, here's a buffet. And so, but you know, in our life, there are crows. There are tricksters. There are things that frankly are out of our control. And those are the things that our wisdom teaches us to let go of. You know, there's that great prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr that's popularized in the recovery movement. You know, Lord, give me the wisdom to change the things I can, to not change the things I cannot. And, you know, the wisdom, and on it goes, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's how we live with the crows in our lives. And we all have them, right? We all have these things. We think things are going to go a certain way. And then there's a letter. There's a knock on the door. There's you know, whatever it may be that begins to happen, that we realize we can't control this. And instead of wasting our energy on those things, we let them go. We free ourselves. And you know, we try to walk in this life unburdened, and unburdened by those things we have the wisdom to discern are not ours to do or ours to have. And that brings me to the second one for the hoe. And the hoe is a lot like the teaching of Jesus, right? You know, the seeds that fall into the brambles, the seeds that fall into the roadside or into the rocks or whatever the case may be. I think the seeds of those that we hoe are the things we realize are not ours to do. And we can engage in them, but we also realize there is an energy drain on us if we do. You know what I'm talking about, right? You know, so let me give you a perfect, if not personal, example of that. And that is, you know, I would say that politics are my drug of choice. And like my rule for adult beverage, you know, I drink my first, I sip my second, and I skip my third. Otherwise, I'll have a fourth and I'll think that's a good idea. It's the same thing with something like politics. First, nobody's calling me and asking what they should do. Second, my job is a minister, which is to see and serve and celebrate the divine magnificence of any and everybody. And as a senior minister, what that means is whoever comes into our center is seen, celebrated, and served. We recognize them, and so whoever you are and wherever you are on your spiritual path, we strive that you are welcome there, which means my idea of what a person should behave and believe and do is none of my business. And so for myself, and I'm not saying that that's not true for somebody else, I'm just saying for myself, it is the wisdom to know what is mine to do and not to do the other. I mean, Carolyn Mace one time had this statement that I think about often. She says, you know, imagine that each and every one of us, and just for the sake of making it easy, say each of us is given 100 units of energy a day. And that 100 units is what, you know, supports the limbic system, all the activities of the body and all the things that they're there, and how we create and how we interact and all that. And it takes ourselves about 100 units in and 100 units out a day. It's kind of like my solar, you know? So she says, you know, how much of that energy is being distracted or siphoned off, you know, to pay for some mortgage of some mausoleum in the past that we're hanging on to? How much energy is siphoned off by us dwelling on things that aren't ours to do? 10%? 20%? 30%, 40%, and on it goes. But what happens is we are then running at an energy deficit because we're spending more than we're taking in. And if we are living in shame, blame, or regret, you know, the three lies, we are draining ourselves off of that, right? You know, and shame is just another way of saying there's something wrong with me. Blame is a way of saying there's something wrong out there and I would be better if it got fixed. Or regret is not living in the present moment. All three of them are energy drains. And so learning what the hoe is just that. It's learning what is ours and what is not ours. That is something that is called discernment. And one of my favorite characters in history, a spiritual hero of mine, was the founder of the Jesuit order, Ignatius Loyola. And he taught the Jesuits, and they practiced this, something called discernment. And here's the thing. Our body tells us. Our body tells us. Our body doesn't lie. And our body will tell us. We know, I know, and I'm sure you know too, if something isn't ours, we can feel it in our body. Now, oftentimes we want something, and sometimes our wanting overrides our discernment, and so we will negate it, or we will numb it, or we will do something to kind of override that whole experience, right? I'm sure that you've done this. I do it. But discernment, he says, is this. And what he says is there's consolate and disconsolate. I love those two words. And consolate is, think of that thing. And if you can feel yourself moving towards it, that's that inner wisdom. That is that divine presence that is luring us, inviting us, drawing us to those things. And then there's the disconsolate, those things that intuitively know, we can almost feel ourselves push against it. How do we sit with that? How do we honor ourselves in a situation like that? And so we practice that, and that's the hoe. And then there is that which is ours to do, the thing that we grow. And this is where the work of someone like Thomas Troward, someone like Charles Fillmore, someone like Ernest Holmes, some of these great old teachers from New Thought, they were giving us things. And if I can offer you a tool for you, I would offer that from someone called Neville, or Neville Goddard. Y'all know who Neville is? So if you don't know who Neville is, he's like one of my, to me, he is kind of the bridge between New Thought and quantum physics. And why that is because he offers a tool that we can use, and it's really kind of interesting, because what he does is he says to put yourself in a hypnagogic state. Another word I love, hypnagogic state. Basically, that's a twilight state. Think about as you're just dozing off. You're sort of not quite asleep, kind of like you are right now. You're not quite asleep, you're not quite awake. You're just kind of in that place. Or in the morning, or sometimes when you're just very relaxed. Because the hypnagogic state is when our conscious mind is relaxing the defenses against our subjective mind. So our subjective mind, like hypnotism, is much more receptive. So he says, place yourself in this hypnagogic state, and then create like a movie. Create an event where it is full feeling, full visual, full, you can hear, you can see, you can smell, you can reflect on what your experience is in the thing that you desired as an accomplished fact, and be in that. Because what you're doing then is you're impressing upon the subjective mind. And then off you go to sleep, or you wake up, you do whatever you're going to do. But what has happened here, and this is where I think quantum science is beginning to show us how the mind works. Because once it's planted within the subjective will figure out how to do it. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like magic. It's you take the thing you desire, you project it out into the future, and the subjective mind builds a bridge to it. And remarkable things begin to happen. There's a synergetic experience that begins to move us toward the thing that we want. And so, we are in a season now of looking at. And I think it's kind of interesting, again, going back to the myths and legends of the Hebrew people, this is the time of considered the new year. Next week will be Rosh Hashanah. This is the autumnal equinox, which in the Wiccan tradition is also a time. And anybody that has ever been on a farm or lived in a farming community, such as I myself, knows, not that I'm good at it, but knows that this is the time that we begin to plant the seeds of those things that we're going to harvest. And so we practice discernment of what to grow and what to throw. And in doing that, we understand that we prepare ourselves by recognizing that one will go to the crow. Some things are just not in our control. That's okay. It's an imperfect because it's an unfinished universe that's learning as it goes. Some will go to the crow, to the trickster, to whatever. Some will go to the hoe, because we'll recognize through our own discernment what is ours and what is not ours to do. And some we will grow. And we will follow someone like Thomas Troward, who says that he says, but we must sow it, and we must also, so to speak, water it by quiet, concentrated contemplation of our desire as an actual accomplished fact. And this is where we can practice the technology of one of our earlier teachers, Neville Goddard, of how to do it, to plant that seed. So, think for yourself. Think what you're preparing for. Think of the seeds of your intentions. And remember, one for the crow, one for the hoe, and one to grow. Thank you.